Imagine a document, just a few words really, that sets the whole tone, the essence of a country, its identity. We're talking about the preamble to India's constitution. Now, what if just a couple of those words became the absolute center of this huge, swirling national debate? It's quite something to think about, isn't it? Today, we're doing a deep dive right into the heart of India's democratic soul. We're focusing on two really significant words added to that preamble: socialism and secularism. These were put in back in 1976. And ever since, they've sparked this ongoing, pretty passionate discussion. It really challenges the idea of what India is and maybe, what it wants to be. So our mission today is to unpack this whole complex thing. We'll look at the history, why these words were added in the first place, the recent calls to maybe review them, and what the Supreme Court had to say. It's a journey to understand the words, sure, but also the huge implications for, well, over 1 billion people. Get ready for some, I think, surprising facts and insights. Hopefully it'll give you a shortcut to really grasping this whole discussion. Okay, let's start at the beginning. The Constitution's grand opening act, the preamble.
Right. It's often called the introduction, or like you said, the opening act. I sometimes think of it as the movie trailer.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you that sneak peek, the core ideas: justice, liberty, equality, fraternity.
And the original one, adopted November 26, 1949, declared India a sovereign democratic republic. It was a huge statement for a brand new nation, just finding its feet after, centuries of colonial rule.
It really was more than just an intro, wasn't it? It laid out the whole philosophy.
Absolutely. It encapsulated the aspirations. The original text itself, it's worth hearing. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November, 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution.
Wow, every word there just feels heavy with meaning. It wasn't just describing things, it was setting a course.
Completely. Sovereign, democratic, republic, strong words, self-governing, ruled by the people's will, a real beacon after the independence struggle.
And those core principles, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, they were seen as essential, right, to hold such a diverse country together.
Exactly. Essential for individual dignity and national unity. That was the foundation.
But then things took a sharp turn. The plot twist, you could say, in 1976.
Ah, yes, the emergency. June 75 to March 77.
Often called a dark period in Indian history. Civil liberty suspended, opposition leaders jailed. A really challenging time for democracy.
Yeah, significant curtailment, no doubt. And that's the backdrop for the 42nd Amendment.
The mini-constitution, as it's often called. Huge changes.
Massive changes. And crucially, this is when socialist and secular were added right into the preamble.
So India suddenly became a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. A major shift.
A profound shift, yeah.
And it happened under the Indian National Congress government, led by Indira Gandhi at the time.
And it wasn't like a switch was flipped overnight, right? The amendment rolled out in stages in early 77.
That's right. January, February, April 77 for different parts. And that context, the emergency context, is a huge reason why these words are still debated so fiercely today.
It casts a long shadow.
Absolutely. The circumstances of their insertion are almost as debated as the words themselves. For some people, it really impacts their legitimacy.
Which brings us right up to the present day. Because this historical debate just came roaring back.
The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, has recently, very publicly, called for a review of these two terms.
So why now? What's their argument?
Well, their argument leans heavily on that history. They say the words were inserted without proper debate, and specifically during the emergency when, democratic processes were, let's say, taking a nap.
Right. And they argue these weren't part of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's original vision for the Constitution. Exactly. They see it as a deviation from what the founders intended.
And the timing of this call wasn't random, was it?
Not at all. Dattatreya Hosabal, the RSS General Secretary, made the call on June 26, 2025. That was at an event marking 50 years since the emergency began.
Using the anniversary to make the point, he called the insertion a draconian act by Congress.
And you have to see this in the bigger picture. The RSS has long advocated for a Hindu Rashtra, a concept they feel aligns with India's civilizational identity.
Which is often seen as conflicting with the idea of secularism in the preamble.
Precisely. And socialism, for them, is often viewed quite negatively, sometimes even called a dirty word, especially regarding economic policies involving state control. They see it as potentially hindering free markets.
So it's more than just words, it's a deep ideological clash.
It really is. It reveals this ongoing tension between the founding ideals and a sort of rising nationalist perspective that challenges some of those original tenets.
Unsurprisingly, this caused quite a stir. Strong reactions from the opposition.
Oh, definitely. A firestorm, you could say.
Mm.
Congress and left parties reacted very quickly.
I saw a quote from Jairam Ramesh, Congress General Secretary, on June 27th.
Yeah, he tweeted something like, the RSS has never accepted the Constitution. It attacked Dr. Ambedkar, Nehru, basically everyone involved in framing it, right from 1949.
Strong words, and the CPIM.
Same day, they called the RSS demand a direct assault on India's core values, really drawing a line in the sand.
But it wasn't unanimous pushback from everyone outside the ruling coalition.
Interestingly, no. Shiv Sena, for instance, actually supported the review. Their argument was similar. The words were not part of the original preamble. These were added during the emergency. So it shows the complexity, doesn't it? Views cut across traditional lines sometimes.
Okay, let's unpack the words themselves then. Because socialism and secularism mean something quite specific in India, different from how they might be understood elsewhere.
That's crucial. Absolutely crucial. Take socialism. In the West, you might think Karl Marx, state ownership of everything.
Right, a command economy, perhaps.
But Indian socialism is, well, different. It's much more focused on social justice, reducing inequality, welfare for all citizens, especially the marginalized.
So how does that actually play out? Can you see it in practice?
You can, yeah.
Ah,
Think about the emphasis on public sector companies for, equitable development, or the reservation system, designed to give disadvantaged communities a leg up. It's about using the state to ensure social and economic equity, but within a democratic system.
okay. And secularism, it also has a unique Indian flavor, right? Often summed up by that phrase, Sarva Dharma Sambhava.
Exactly. Equal respect for all religions. It's not the strict wall of separation between religion and state you might hear about in, say, the US or France.
So the state doesn't pick favorites among religions.
Correct. Equal respect is the principle. But that's is key. The Indian state can intervene in religious matters
Oh, interesting. When would that happen?
if it's deemed necessary for the greater good or for social reform. Think about the ban on triple talaq, aimed at protecting Muslim women's rights, or government bodies regulating temple administration sometimes. It's a more engaged form of secularism.
So has the Supreme Court clarified these specific Indian meanings?
Yes, they have. In that 2024 ruling we mentioned, they explicitly addressed this. They said, secular means a republic upholding equal respect for all religions.
Okay.
And socialist represents a republic dedicated to eliminating all forms of exploitation, social, political, or economic. So they provided a clear, context-specific definition.
Right. So given all this heat, all this debate, where does the Supreme Court actually stand on the legality of adding these words in the first place? Did they settle it?
Well, that brings us to a really significant legal moment, November 25, 2024. A Supreme Court bench, led by Chief Justice Sanjeev Khanna and Justice Sanjay Kumar, they dismissed petitions that were challenging the inclusion of socialist and secular.
Some outright. What was their reasoning?
Pretty firm reasoning, yeah. They basically said, look, there's no legitimate cause or justification to challenge this amendment after almost 44 years.
44 years is a long time.
It is. And the court felt the meanings are generally understood by we, the people of India, and that their inclusion hadn't actually stopped any government from pursuing particular policies. It sounded like they viewed it as legally settled.
And these petitions weren't new, right? They'd been around a while.
Filed back in 2020. One was by BJP leader Subramanian Swamy, who argued the additions were retrospective, even calling it a fraud on the Constitution.
Strong language, but the court didn't agree.
No. They upheld that Article 368 of the Constitution does allow the preamble to be amended. And crucially, the original adoption date, November 26, 1949, doesn't prevent future amendments.
So legally speaking, the door seems closed by the highest court?
Legally, yes. But what's fascinating, I think, is how even a definitive ruling from the Supreme Court doesn't necessarily end a deep political and cultural debate like this one. It shows the limits of legal decisions in achieving broad social agreement when core ideologies clash.
That's a really important point. So the court has spoken, but how does this land with the public? How does the average person in India feel about socialism and secularism? Is it a done deal for them?
It's definitely a mixed bag out there.
Yeah.
Very diverse opinions, as you'd expect.
Okay.
Take socialism. For some, it's genuinely seen as vital for inclusive development, making sure progress reaches everyone, especially the most vulnerable.
But others see it differently.
Others see it as a drag on economic growth, something that maybe holds back private business and overall prosperity. So a real split there.
And secularism, probably even more contentious.
Arguably, yes. For many, many Indians, it's the absolute foundation of their pluralistic society.
Yeah.
The guarantee that keeps India's incredible diversity intact ensures no single religion dominates.
But there's another view, too.
There is. Others see it, sometimes quite cynically, as a sham, or maybe as political pandering, especially to minority groups for votes, a feeling that it's been misused.
So even after the Supreme Court ruling in 2024.
Right, even after that, the political arguments haven't stopped. The RSS repeated their call for review in June 2025 after the court's decision.
And the opposition, like Congress and RJD, hit back hard again.
Exactly. Which just underlines how incredibly sensitive this topic is. There are deep ideological fault lines. There's just no clear consensus across the board. It's very much a live issue, part of India's ongoing political conversation. Far from over.
So reflecting on all this, what does it mean for you listening? We've journeyed through a debate that's clearly about much more than just two words. It really goes to the soul of the nation.
We've seen how history, law, public feeling, it all gets tangled together around these ideas.
It really makes you think, what are the enduring values here? Because at its core, the preamble, the whole Constitution, stands for justice, liberty, equality, fraternity.
Absolutely. Those feel like the deeper spirit, right? Transcending any specific word. They define the character, the commitment to all citizens.
And it's a good reminder, isn't it? The Constitution isn't some dusty old document set in stone.
Not at all. It's living, breathing. It evolves. It reflects the country's journey. Socialism and secularism, whatever the debate, represent commitments in the unique Indian way towards inclusion, justice, equity. They get interpreted and reinterpreted over time.
You know, people often call the Constitution a blueprint, but maybe a better metaphor. Maybe it's like a good marriage.
How so?
Well, it takes constant work, right? Compromise. Sometimes, yeah, a bit of arguing, spirited debate.
Okay, I see that.
But ultimately, that's what keeps the whole thing strong, keeps it together.
That's a nice way to put it.
So a final thought for you to maybe chew on. How do you see these fundamental ideas, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, and these debated concepts of socialism and secularism? How do you see them shaping India's path forward?
It's a huge conversation affecting over 1 billion lives. Understanding is pretty key to understanding India today.